Let's start with a show of hands. Who was here this time last year when we did this? Whoa. People who come back and do it again. Okay, let's try another one. Who's actually an AdEPT shareholder? No, we got quite a few. Let's try another sneaky one. Who used to be but sold when the share price went up? Okay, at least one. There's at least one honest person in the room. Oh, okay. When Sharesoc asked us to come back, they said, look, you guys were the first to speak in Richmond a year ago. Would you come back and tell us what happened? Your chairman was nearly right. That's what happened. When I say we, that's the royal we, it means John did. We went back to have a look at what the share price was the day when we spoke to you, where it is now. It's up 42% in a year. So effectively, we're going to address two questions. One is, what's driving that? Then the second one, you're all sat there thinking, have I missed it? Is it still exciting? Let's be honest about it. We're all investors. Me too. Okay? I'm still very excited about this. Okay. So let me introduce you to some people. This is really unusual. You happen to have the three exec directors of the PLC board all here at once. And that's probably a first, I think, where we've all turned up together. So let's start off with, hello, who are you?
My name is John Swate. I'm the finance director. And those of you that were here last year, I was also here.
Now we have a Richmond first-timer. Hello, Richard. Who are you?
I'm Richard Burbidge. I'm the Unified Communications Director and on the board of AdEPT Telecom PLC.
So when we do this, the first thing we do is, let's do a reminder of what do we actually do? And the first thing I'll say to you is, we went through the slides yesterday morning to see what we told you last time. And you know what? We did exactly what we told you, and we did it a little bit faster. Go on, Richard.
So they say a picture paints 1,000 words, and this probably does us justice in terms of describing what we do. If we were doing this picture again, we would probably crop the bird on top of the lady's head there, but it took us about 6 months to notice that it existed there until somebody pointed it out. But try to focus on the words rather than some of the other parts of the picture. We may have come from a lines and minutes background, but very much the business now is about unified communications, it's about collaboration, it's about managed services, it's about cloud. And this is what people in business are asking for us with their solutions that we're putting together for them. So it's everything from Wi-Fi to contact center to UC, as I say, collaboration, which is about video conferencing, sharing, screen sharing, and things that go with it, presence tracking, instant messaging. But if anybody wants a better description of what some of the acronyms and some of the expressions are, then do ask me or the rest of the team afterwards, and we'll be happy to go through it with you.
In some respects, it's easier to say, what do we not do now, because it's so wide. We don't sell a lot of mobile phones, but we do put a lot of apps on mobile phones, okay? And we'll talk you through in a minute, the latest addition to the stable is an IT business, because it's getting a little bit blurred. What is telecoms, what's IT? So when you see things like Skype for Business, what is that? Is it an app on your desktop, or is it a telecoms product? Right, the line's getting a bit blurred. Okay, John.
So this is the simple business model. Down the left-hand side, we supply a full range of products. In each of those products, we buy from every network carrier, every supplier across the UK, everyone you can think of. In each of the product sets, we have at least 2 suppliers, partly for competitive tension on the pricing side of things, but also typically suppliers tend to be stronger in some areas than others, and when you're offering a full suite of products to people, then we need to be able to offer, what suits the customer, because at the end of the day, we're putting together a solution for them. With AdEPT, it all comes into a single point of contact, one person, one solution, one bill. So the customers, if they want to know which suppliers it is that we're using, then we're quite happy to let them know, but most of them are quite happy for us just to be their sort of technical design authority and give them the best of breed solution at the best price point. As it says at the bottom, minimal infrastructure. We are a non-network infrastructure player. We just buy off the other networks and resell it.
It took me 25 years to spot the blindingly obvious. What you want in life is a recurring revenue model that has no capex, because that's a cash machine. That's fundamentally what we are.
So we are based in the head office in Tunbridge Wells in Kent. That is the connectivity part of our business, and how AdEPT was started, just solely in the office there. There's 32 employees, providing mainly external connectivity to the building, so calls, lines, broadband, superfast broadband, complex data networks, those sort of things. The business we acquired down in Fleet in Hampshire, which was called Centrix back in May 2015, that's an Avaya Aura specialist focusing on high-end, larger customers. There's 25 employees down in that office. Northampton is the business we acquired back in May 16, Comms Group. That's also an Avaya specialist, but focusing on the IP Office product, which is focusing on smaller end customers with 19 employees. And then down the right-hand side, are the 3 sites that we've just acquired as a result of the IT acquisition we did on the 1st of February.
Now, as we get going, we're going to talk you through some of the deals, why we've done them, etc. What's not changed, if you remember 5-7 years ago, we were completely concentrated on small businesses, the grey part of that pie. 72% is now in much larger businesses. That's where the focus is, and we'll give you some case studies as we wander through so you understand who we're working with.
So what has changed? Well, this is the revenue split for... These are half one revenue splits, but it hasn't really changed if you look at the full year. It's just the last numbers we've got available are the September 16 numbers. If you'd taken this business 5 to 7 years ago, we would have been 100% the grey section, a fixed line business. The thing that we're trying to do, like all the other businesses, is transition away from the traditional fixed line business and move more towards managed services, because that's where everyone's going. People are coming from different directions. We're coming from a telecoms end. There's people coming in from the IT end. There's people coming in from the maintenance side. But we're all trying to get to the same place. We've transitioned quite significantly over the last 3 to 5 years. If you see here, 2 years ago, we were at 27% managed services, but we're now more than half managed services.
So when we came here a year ago, I said to you, we're on the cusp of transforming from a traditional telecoms business into a managed service business. That was clearly true, because this was the point where in the first half we moved to 53%. Now, you cannot grow a business of this size organically that quick. You have to do some acquisitions to change it. The fundamental problem that most people make when they do that is they spend shed loads of money and they end up with a massive pile of debt. What we'll show in a minute is we've done a transition that big and we've not ended up with a mass pile of debt. Okay? That's the important point. Right. Let's do public sector and healthcare. So first of all, let's do the title. The reason why we call it public sector and healthcare rather than just public sector is that we straddle both sides of private hospitals and public hospitals. Richard was the owner of the business we bought in Fleet, Centrix. And one of the reasons we bought it, there was lots of reasons, there was great technology, great people. They also had 70% of all the private hospitals in London. If any of you got private medical care, every famous hospital that you can think of is with us. The Portland, the Wellington, the Shard, One London Bridge, Harley Street Clinic, it goes on, okay. And our logic was this: we started our public sector drive, if you remember, by going into councils, and we said we'll go into the NHS second. But you've got a chicken and egg problem. How do you win an NHS hospital or whatever if you've never won one before? Well, you go and buy the largest provider to private hospitals, and that gives you huge credibility. Now, there's a picture up there of Parliament, just to remind me to talk about Parliament. It may be surprising for a business of this size, but the Parliamentary Digital Service, the Houses of Parliament, is us. So it's not BT or something like that. We've removed them, okay? Part of the Cabinet Office is now us. If you look at the bottom, when I came to see you last year, we had 28 councils as customers. We now have 40. We just started the movement into the NHS, and you can see on here, we had 3 NHS trusts. We now have 9. And this is why I'm telling you that everything we told you we would do, we don't deviate. We've carried on and we've done it. So 29% was just before we did the IT business, which doesn't have a public sector arm, so that's probably averages back down to about 25. But you can see, very, very interesting move. Now, don't forget, the government has set a target that they think that the way to grow the economy is to spend more money with SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises. Originally in 2010, Francis Maud set the target of, I want 25% of all public sector spend to be with SMEs by the end of that parliament, which was 2015. They got to 26.1. Now, obviously, you've all read the Conservative Party manifesto, and on page 17, it said, we like this idea because the smaller guys are not just cheaper, they're quicker, they're more innovative, they can launch products much faster than the giants can. So we want to now have a third of all public sector money with SMEs by 2020. That means, you remember the old days where you got a tick in the box for buying from IBM or BT? It's now the opposite way around. You get a tick in the box from moving to the smaller guys. So some of you may have seen, if you linked in with me, that in November, I was appointed to the Cabinet Office SME panel. So at that level, I represent the telecoms industry, advising the government, how are we going to do that? That's the credibility that AdEPT now has in this sector. John.
So Ian's talked quite a bit there about public sector, but let's not forget that 70% of our business is not in public sector. So we still have, you know, good range of commercial customers, a lot of names that you would recognise. We supply to Coca-Cola Europe, Expressway Holiday Inn, Halfords Auto Centres, TalkSport. You know, there's still some good, well-recognised names in there. I mean, we've got around 20,000 customers in total, so these are just a few, but some well-recognised names in there. As Ian said, we're supplying 70% of all the private hospitals in London, and one of the focuses that we have down in Fleet in Richard's business is a focus on business centres, where we have some great products in there. And just in the last 12 months, we've got 12 new centres that have come on board.
Let's just do that a bit. We bought Richard's business for great technology, but for two very strong verticals. We've talked about private hospitals. How many business centres do you think that you've got as customers?
Well, I know we've got just in excess of 200 business centres. But when we first set up Centrix about 15, 16 years ago, we went into two vertical markets, private healthcare and business centres, because we saw them both as being recession-proof, which proved to be true. Private healthcare, for fairly obvious reasons. Business centres, because even in a recession, businesses will either downsize or want the flexibility of a short-term license rather than committing to a long commercial lease. And as we say, it's in excess of 200 business centres that we have as customers now.
If any of you are sports fans, by the way, it doesn't matter, football, rugby, whatever, every time you listen to Talk Sport, every single report from a sports stadium is down an AdEPT telecom phone line, broadcast at the other end. That's the way the technology works. Okay? Right. Clearly, we've grown rapidly through acquisitions. It's been quite a busy period. In the last 9 months, we've done 3 acquisitions and a banking deal, which is a bit of moving by anybody's standards, okay? And my friend's still smiling here, okay? So we'll talk you through some of the deals and why we like them. Richard.
So we bought CAT Communications back in November last year. CAT Communications was a small competitor of the Fleet office, where we sell and supply and look after and support and maintain an Avaya Aura product set. That's exactly what CAT Communications did. And the idea really was to try and integrate it within the Fleet business to get the economies of scale that we had in Fleet. So we already knew that we were going to get some growth there, and that's either acquisitional growth or just normal growth in terms of selling more products to existing customers or new products to new customers, etc. But that was very recent, I would say. That was just in November.
Okay. So let's not forget the first one, because we did 3. So we did a deal, first of all, in May 16, which was this bottom one, part of the triangle. And whilst this is our sweet spot, 150 to 7,500 users, I couldn't get Richard's sales team to even look at anything under 150 users. It's just too small. So we bought a 4 million turnover business that makes about 900,000 a year, you know, a nice profitable one, to pick up the small stuff. So it's easy for us to forget that that was a really smart deal. So that was May. This is November. Now let's look at the November one in a bit more detail.
So CAT Communications was not by any stretch of the imagination a large acquisition, but it did work very, very well by fitting it and integrating it into Fleet. As we can see here, the revenue of 1.25 million with an EBITDA of just under, or about 0.4 of a million. The most important thing that it really brought to us as a business was a number of prestigious names as well: Coca-Cola, ASOS, Citrix. Whilst CAT was a small business, they did have some very large companies that they looked after and supported. And that's been quite important to integrate those businesses into our existing 24-hour support help desk that we have in Fleet as well.
So when you look at that triangle, at the top bit it was greyed out. We don't operate above 7,500 users. It's too big for us. There's too many tanks playing in that space. So this fitted the space, but we've never done an integration into Fleet before. We've done 19 integrations into Tunbridge Wells. We know how to do that. We normally have a rule that says, if it doesn't shift your EBITDA by 10%, don't do it. Because it's as hard to do a small deal as a big deal. However, if I declare it strategic, then we do it. And the first one that we're going to merge in, should we take the risk with a 12 million turnover one, or try a 1.2 million one, and let's just see if it works? So there was a lot of sense in doing a slightly smaller one, just to make sure it works. Does it work? Yes, it does. It's finished, it's integrated already. But to find a private family business that ran Coca-Cola, Citrix and ASOS, they were never going to get away. Amazing they've done it, but once we saw that, we thought, we'll take that. Right, we then outgrew our banking facility. So let's just start with, John, can you just explain what do I mean by we outgrew the banking facility? Because it wasn't that old.
No, so the previous banking facility was actually put in place in April 2015. Under that facility, it was a £15 million revolving credit facility, but with a 2.5 times EBITDA to net debt multiple. At the time after we'd done the CAT acquisition, our annualised EBITDA was 7.5 million. So if you multiply that by 2.5 times, then you could see we were already at the stage where the business could support a £20 million banking facility. So we took the decision that what we would do is extend the bank facility, which we've done in February 2017 to give us some more funding available for acquisitions. But we also took the decision that now was probably the right time to move from a single bank deal to a dual facility, because if we're moving from 15 to a £30 million facility, it's a big ask if at the next stage on we ask another bank to come in at a much higher number, whereas it's much easier to have the discussion to see if they want to go from 0 to 15 million rather than in 3 or 5 years' time, do you want to come in straight in at 30? So it says here we've extended it from a 15 to a £30 million facility. That is true, but we have in place what we call an accordion bank facility. I don't know if you're familiar with those. So this is actually a split facility. We've got an initial £20 million RCF and then an accordion extension of up to 10 million, which we can draw down. The beauty of that structure is that we've only paid the fees on the 20 million. So if we don't need it for whatever reason, we haven't paid for it. We only pay for it when we need it.
So let's pick up some key points that John's just said, because that's quite important. And if you're not used to banking, then let's just go back over this. There comes a point where any business, a bank thinks, actually I'd like to bring in a second or third bank and just spread the risk. That's just naturally what they do. When they come in, they don't like to haggle and say, I'll have 20% of the debt and you have 80. They come in pari passu. So if there's two of them, they come in at the same level, 50-50. So we could have gone from 15 to, say, 25 million with Barclays, but what it would have meant was the first time we met a second bank, they'd have had to come in at 25 million from day one just to get level. And we thought, that might be a bit too big of an ask. Let's bring it in now when 15 million is a sensible. So that was the first bit. The concept of accordions is quite new and it's quite interesting because what used to happen before was, let's think of it as a credit limit. Okay, so when we had a 15 million credit limit, we would pay the full interest on the stuff that we borrowed, but you pay 40% of the margin on the stuff you hadn't borrowed. That's all right if you borrowed 12 and you're just paying a small amount to have, say, 3 million on the shelf waiting. It's a different kettle of fish when you're thinking I'll go to 30 million and I might be paying to have 15 million sat there just in case. So the concept of us saying, I'll pay for 20 million, but I'm not paying for the other 10, but I want you to sign the documents such that nothing changes. As soon as we're ready, we just submit the forms and we pull it down. That's the beauty of it. So everything's in place for 30, but we're currently only paying for 20. Okay? Okay, so let's talk IT. I'll take this bit. Okay, right. So we're really concentrating on this piece. You saw us bulk up CAT and Avaya Aura, and we've been saying for some time that it's getting a very blurred line between what is telecoms and what's IT. If you remember when I came here a year ago, I told you that on average we buy 1 out of every 10 businesses that we look at. So on the basis we've now bought 23, don't be surprised if I tell you we've looked at over 250 businesses in the last 10 years. We know what they look like or what they should look like before we open the tin. And it took us 2 years to find an IT business that we wanted. Right? Now, why was that? So let's take you through the thought process of why we turned things down. Some of the IT businesses were scattered around the UK. I don't want to go into a new sector and find it's in Newcastle. If it's something new, we have to be able to get in a car or a train and be there by lunchtime and come back again so we can keep an eye on it. You can get as fancy as you want with management, but you can't beat turning up. Is rule one. Okay. The second bit is, are there any IT people in the room before I start commenting about IT people? There is a great danger in IT that you equate cleverness with price. I equate how much money you make with what you're worth, not how many qualifications you've got. And it took us a while to keep going till we wanted a London and South East based IT business. And after about 18, 20 months, we found one. I'm not going to rebrand this one. Well, is this not the best name ever for an outsourced IT department? Our IT department. You can't help, every time they've got a problem, somebody says, who should we ring? Our IT. Subliminally, it's a great name. Right. Pro forma, this is the last set of accounts that's submitted to Companies House, says 5.2 million, making about 670k. The reality is, in the year since that, it's now about 5.4, making 900. Okay, and I'll show you that in a minute. The beauty of it is there's only one owner. He's staying with us for at least a minimum of a year. How nice to get badges like Microsoft Gold, Apple Specialist, VMware. There's not a lot of badges we don't have now. Right, so in terms of what they do, complete outsourced IT function. I mean, I remember at one point I had a 6-story building. I used to ring down 4 floors to get the IT team. They might as well have been down the road. Okay, they've got 2 very good tier 3, tier 4 data centers, for those who understand. That's quite top level stuff, right? That has Microsoft Azure, 365, Skype for Business, all the clever stuff. Security is not going away. The one bit that is definitely a growth area in IT is security of what's happening. And obviously they buy loads of hardware and software for people. So very, very good skill set in here. What this is trying to explain, John?
If you remember earlier when we had the slide splitting us, showing the growth in the managed services sector, on a pro forma basis, if we add in the ourIT acquisition that we've just done, the 53% would actually now be 60%. So we're way beyond the 50% target that we had, and we can only see that bit growing.
So a year ago we came to you and said we are transitioning from a classic telecoms company into a managed services company, and when I sat here a year later saying effectively we're 60% managed services, that is a huge change in about 18 months. Numbers, that's a John thing, really.
So the impact of ourIT on the EBITDA, I mean, you can see here that the March 2015, March 2016, we've had significant amount of growth, 4.6 million up to 6.2. The current year end to March 17, we're only getting a small proportion of the EBITDA for ourIT because we're only getting a 2-month contribution, which is rounded down to 100k. But on a full year basis now, we're expecting ourIT to add at least 900,000. So we're currently running at an EBITDA of 8.4 million. In terms of the debt, because all the acquisitions we've done to date have all been financed through debt. ourIT has increased our year-end debt up to 17 million. On a reported basis, that's a 2.3 covenant because we've only got 2 months contribution of the EBITDA, but on a pro forma full year basis, we're at 2 times EBITDA. And looking forward, it gets maintained at 2 times because we've got a proportion of the consideration on an earn-out basis. So we've got some earn-out payments to make in the coming year.
In terms of the way we look at it, because we are very risk averse, let's not forget, my family's the biggest shareholder. We're not going to ruin this. That's just the biggest sort of support that you've all got, right? Is the absolute value of the debt is not relevant, because obviously the bigger you are, the more debt you can hold. The relevant bit is this bit. How does your debt relate to your EBITDA? Okay? If I'm in the city, as long as that number is less than 2.5, they're classed as conservative. If you go back to the new banking deal, the bank says we could borrow 3 times. We don't want to. So we've done that massive change from 27% to 60% managed services in 2 years, and the debt is still only 2 times EBITDA. That's the cleverness of what we've done, really. Okay?
And I think this might be the last slide. Let's not forget that we are a dividend-paying stock. We're operating a progressive policy. Here you can see the progression of the dividend growing fairly significantly. Current year-end dividend forecast is 7.5 pence. We've already announced the half-year dividend, and we're expecting to declare a full-year dividend with the March results. And the 2018 we forecast in the markets for the dividend to go up from 7.5 to 8p. We're more than comfortable with that as a dividend number.
What we're trying to do is try and get the dividend in the 3% plus range. But as soon as we shift it into 3% plus range, the share price moves and it goes back to about 2.8. That's the reality of what we're doing. But the other way of looking at it is it theoretically should put a floor under the share price. Because the share price dips again, the yield gets too high. See what I mean? So, if you like, we're a bit like builders. Every time we push it up, let's put another foundation underneath it. That's what we're trying to do as we go along. Right. If you sit in a PLC board meeting, now at some point, a rather dapper gentleman who you'll spot our chairman's about to arrive, he completely misunderestimated. He thought he could get from Cambridge to here between 5 and 7 o'clock, which we had a giggle at. But he will turn up soon. Right. And what he'll tell you is, when we have a PLC board meeting, when you're knocking out roughly 20% EBITDA on sales, you don't discuss operational efficiency, because that's just a given, isn't it? Right? And we're currently at about 21 point something. What we discuss is, what are we going to do with the cash? How much are we going to dish out as dividend, and how are we going to put back in again to do acquisitions and accelerate the growth? That's the fundamental debate that we have. Okay? Q&A.
My IT department sounds like a very interesting acquisition. How important is the current owner to the technical and strategic development of that business?
That is one of the absolutely key things that we look at, because at the end of the day, we always pay some money down and then we pay some a year later. And even if people say they want to stay, once you've got your hands on a few millions, you might change your mind. So the good news is, on this one, is he's staying for a year, but there is a very clear number 2 who's in his late 30s and is a very, very bright lad.
The accordion facility, do you have to meet any conditions, President, to be able to use the 10 million?
There are no specific conditions precedent. What we have written into the bank facility is that because we've dealt with Barclays and RBS for the last 12 years, they know us very well. So within the bank facility, acquisitions that are under 2.5 million consideration, we can do without their consent. We can just go ahead. Anything more than that, they have to consent to the acquisition. So effectively, they have the control as to what we use the money on.
Let's put that in context. That's effectively 2 or 3 sides of A4. It's a quick overview. It's not like, we haven't met you, please send us 40 pages. Okay.
Given the level of acquisitions recently and the increased level of net debt, is it fair to say that looking forward, say over the next couple of years, it's largely going to be organic growth from the company?
The reason why I paused in answering this is those who've met me before will know I absolutely refuse to ever forecast acquisitions. Okay? So I'll answer it with our general policy. We have a 30 million facility, of which we've spent 17.1. We clearly have the ability, if we wished to issue equity at this share price. We on average buy one deal out of every 10 we look at. We look at deals all the time. The correct time to do a deal is if you find one at the right price, not at a specific point in time. I'll give you an example. We did the IT deal on the 1st of February. Since the 1st of February, we've received how many, do you think, John?
At least 6 other businesses up for sale in the space that we're looking at.
Now, we've rejected them all. So, all I'll say to you is, we have the ability and the experience to do them. If I find one, we'll do it. But I'll tell you about it when we find it, not before.
I'm fascinated by a few things. You haven't mentioned your buyback of shares policy, which seems to be a drip feed one. I'd like you to just talk about the options you've yet to grant and whether they're written into the figures in any way or whether we're going to have a lot more dilution. And lastly, perhaps, I'd like to know a little bit about why Lukic sold so many shares when he didn't have that many.
Okay. Right, so the first question was about the share buybacks. We don't have a specific policy on share buybacks, but you may have seen over the last 3 or 4 days, we have been doing a few share buybacks. We had an employee who exercised options over 32,000 shares, and the company agreed to buy them back in, rather than going out and finding a potential investor for only 32,000 shares. Unfortunately, because of the stock exchange rules, we can only buy up to 50% of the previous 20 days volume of shares, and we don't have a huge volume in shares, so we've unfortunately had to split the 32,000 over about 10 days. So that we would have liked to have just done it in one single tranche. So that's the recent reason for the share buybacks. Before that, I think the last ones we did were over a year ago, when we thought that the share price was below where it should be. So good use of cash was to buy the shares back in and reduce the dilution on shareholders.
Yeah. We can only do share buybacks when we're not inside. We are inside a lot more than you think. As an acquisition vehicle, as soon as we sign a letter of intent with somebody, we have knowledge that you don't have, and therefore we cannot go into the market. So the fact that we haven't been in for quite a long time, we've just done 3 deals in 9 months. I'll give you a clue why we couldn't go back into the market, if you see that's the way it was. You're going back quite a long time in history to ask Dush Lukic, who's our independent non-exec, sold some 2 years ago. Right? He had a family need for about 50 grand, and it was a very small deal. And we said, you've been with us nearly 10 years. It's not for us to stand in the way if you need 50 grand. That was it. So it was not a big issue at all. Options dilution. The total number of options outstanding at the moment is about 200,000 max. 220,000 shares on 22.5 million. It's tiny. So there's no big dilution on that. Okay.
Ian, John, Richard, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Great presentation.